I guess the overarching theme of what I'm going to be talking about is that if there was ever a time to be a thought leader in the security space, then it's now. I mean, we've had a year of amazing security news. You've got the Snowden leaks, you've got the epic breaches like Target, you've got much better mainstream understanding of what the issues are here in security. And as a writer as well, you know, this is when we should really be exploiting this interest. For me as a journalist, by doing it by, you know, getting as much work as I can, but you know, for you guys to actually, you know, take a stand and say some really interesting stuff. You know, the question is, you know, what stand to take, how to do that, and I guess my first main point is going to be around data, and Diane touched on that briefly. So the two books you can see up there, they're two of my favorite books that I've read, I think, in the past 2 years, and the reason why has been is purely that they've taken unbelievable amounts of data, just reams and reams of information, and wrapped great narratives around it. Nate Silver, I'm sure you'll all know, is the guy who wrote Signal and Noise, but before that, he's the guy who basically predicted the US election results out of big data. You know, the fact that a big data book is now popular culture book is pretty amazing, and shows where we're at with this kind of stuff. I mean, you might not go as big as Silver or as big as Pinker. You know, these guys are pretty huge thought leaders in their respective fields, but it shows where you can get to, and I'll come back to how big you can go with this stuff now, especially in the security field. I mean, looking at Pinker in particular, he's particularly good at wrapping these narratives around data. His essential argument is that violence has declined over time, and we're now the most peaceable we've ever been, which, you know, most people would think is nonsense. But, you know, he's taken all this data and he's proven it and shown it over a long period of time. And my point here is that in the security industry, I know for a fact that you guys are sitting on a lot of interesting information. I'll give you one example from my past year. It was in December, and I was sat down with a guy from Dell SecureWorks, and he just offhand mentions that they know how many people have been infected with CryptoLocker, and CryptoLocker had been probably the biggest malware story of the year for anyone who was paying attention. And he gives me that little slice of information, and I say, okay, well, can you talk about that to the press? And he's like, yeah, sure. So we go ahead and have this conversation, and you know, 2 weeks later, they're in the register. There's an exclusive. It's got their name in it. It's got their comment in it. They come across as you know, the source of knowledge, and the guys there and the researchers there come across as thought leaders. I mean, it's occasionally it's that simple. It's looking at the data that you're sitting on, wrapping the narrative around it, and then going out with it. Diane mentioned, you know, how you can do this and potentially go and get surveys, but to be honest, most of the surveys we see as journalists are pretty bland stuff. You know, we're bored of, you know, how much does a breach cost, how many employees use their own devices. You know, we're tired of that. We know that you guys are sitting on information, and all it takes is just to, you know, dig deep and find it. I saw a great quote today, which goes like this. It was one that I'd completely forgotten about, but it was, if you torture data sufficiently, it will confess to almost anything. And I think that's kind of perfectly sums this up. You know the data's there, you just need to exploit it. Cool, if we can move on to the next slide. So yeah, this is all about finding the right medium. There are a lot of choices. Diane touched on quite a few of them. I'll give my opinion on which one I think is actually the best way to go from a security perspective. I mean, you've got social networks. Yep, they're good, but for me, they're just advertising platforms. Company blogs can also be useful. We've seen a lot of these in the security world, and they're usually a good platform to share unique research with, or to talk about current trends, but they're not really creating personalities. They're not creating individual thought leaders. One one of the most effective ones I have seen, which was essentially a completely separate site, was Naked Security, and that's obviously still going. And that's where Graham Cluley made his name, and it's still a great site, still a really good place to pick up information on the latest threats. But again, now Graham Cluley's gone. I personally think it's lost a bit of that personality, and now Graham, and this is my point here, Graham has gone to create his own website, and this is, I think, the perfect way to do it. You take the personality and you build web apps, you build content essentially around them and their knowledge. And the example that I've got, the picture on the guy on the bottom right there, I'm sure you'll all know, or hopefully you know that face. You should do if you're in the security industry. It's Brian Krebs, and he's not part of a vendor, but he's sitting on pretty much the same information that a lot of vendors are. A lot of vendors are going around the underground forums. They're collecting, things like stolen logins. He's just able to spend the time and wrap the stories around it, and I personally believe that the security companies can do the same and on a greater magnitude. It's just we don't really see enough of it. As a journalist, I would be jumping on anything like that, especially if it's coming from trusted security vendors. So yeah, in my opinion, I think the way to go, and I know I'm probably slightly contradicting Diane here in the fact that she said don't let personality overtake the company, but I think you really do need to create personalities. You need to pick 2 or 3 people who are really going to be your thought leaders, and then really big them up, for want of a better phrase. I guess my final point here would be on frequency. You need to decide how much you're going to post, how much you're going to be in appearance, because I think overkill is a big problem. You want to be present, but you don't want to be overly present, if you see what I mean. And if you're making big comments about security every single day, people are just going to assume that you're saying things for the sake of it, just because you want to be a thought leader without actually doing doing the right thing to become a thought leader. And you don't want to become a cliche. You don't want to tire people out. And pick your moments so that when you do say something, people actually listen. Go on to the next slide. Thanks. Yeah, this is just a really kind of basic point, and I'll get through this very quickly. There's no need to sell products directly through whatever thought leadership program you're doing. Journalists and general readers, they'll see through it, and it becomes this sort of surreptitious, not very nice experience when you realize, someone's making a great point, and then at the end of it you realize the only reason they're doing it is to sell a product, rather than either be helpful or do something altruistically. We want to believe that you're doing something not because it's backed by commercial interest. And and maybe this is slightly cynical to say as a journalist, but just don't be obvious about it. There's no need. At the end of the day, all you need to do here is have respect for your audience. I think that's what it comes down to. They will know that you work for a company. They'll figure it out. Give them the respect, and then you'll get respect back. And then hopefully that will filter, well, it almost certainly will filter down to the brand, and we've seen that a lot, and I'll come back to that again later. We can move on to the next slide. So yeah, this is the final slide, and I mean I've worked across trade and national, but I'll talk about it from a trade perspective, because I know that Murad has a much better experience than I do on that. But a lot of things kind of remain the same. We want interviewees who can talk a lot but aren't overly annoying. We want people who say original things, and we essentially want people who can say things that will make news or make a news headline. So you can frame things in a really succinct but surprising way, I guess is the key thing here. But in terms of differences with trade you really have to think about the audience of the journalist that you're speaking to here. So I'll give you an example. I guess with the security example, we'll say a 0-day vulnerability hits. We don't want to know what's, we don't solely want to know what's vulnerable and who is being attacked. We want to know whether the vendor has responded responsibly. Do IT guys have enough help there? We want to know how this relates to the wider threat landscape. For instance, how might the vulnerability be changed to another vulnerability to carry out an exploit? Are there things that IT guys or CEOs even, or CISOs, or whoever it is that's the audience, they need the extra detail. So yeah, in terms of good examples, from what I've been talking about as a whole, I'm sure you'll know the guy in the bottom left, Brewster, looking particularly cool there. I mean, he's not the easiest man to talk to, but when he talks, he gives you quotes that make stories. I mean, just type his name into Google News right now, and you'll see reams of content. And this guy, remember that this guy had been at BT for years and years. He's now at a new company called CO3. And he doesn't sell. He just talks on topics because he built his career. He was a respected cryptographer. He wrote books. Was a very, very niche subject at the time, and now he knows that because he's so knowledgeable on that, he can talk about it to the general public, he can talk about it to security specialists, he can talk about it with anyone, and then he can talk about wider security issues at the same time. I mean, he's a great public speaker. He's not the most open guy on the internet. He doesn't write a huge amount. He's got his own website though, so that kind of relates back to what I was saying about the ideal platform. And the guy in the middle, that's Josh Corman. He's a bit quieter, but the reason why I really like him, and this goes for, I guess, the other two as well, is that he's very, very approachable. I can get him on Skype. We won't have to go through, sorry Diane, and sorry all the PRs listening, but he won't, take us through the PR rigmarole of, getting permission just to say something. It's very frustrating as a journalist when you just want some comment, and it's not particularly controversial comment, but it's very good comment, it's very insightful comment, and there's no reason for a PR to look at it. But a lot of people will still kind of go through the process just being terrified of journalists, and I admit that some of us are pretty terrifying sometimes, but it shouldn't be that much of a horrific experience to come to us and talk about what you know about. The other cool thing that Josh does is he essentially does loads of extracurricular stuff, and these are the kind of guys we like, the guys who do more than just their day job. I mean, he's recently set up something called We Are the Cavalry. I would very much recommend you all go and look at it. It focuses on vulnerability research for public safety, so we're talking about people hacking homes and setting things on fire. We're talking about people hacking into heart monitors and things like that, and this guy, he's doing it as a non-profit. He's doing it completely off his own back just because he's worried about it and he's knowledgeable about it and he knows that he can make a difference, and that's why I really like Josh. On the bottom right, on the very bottom right, is James Lyon. He's the best presenter I've seen in the security industry. If you get a chance to see someone presenting and you want an example of someone who's likable, funny, very, very eloquent, James Lyon's your man, hence why he in that picture is actually sat next to Snoop Dogg, and then to the left of Snoop Dogg is Bill Maher. So he's on a US talk show. This is a guy from Sophos. He's in his 20s still. He hasn't been around for that long, but in that short amount of time, just by being incredibly approachable and likable, he's on an HBO talk show. And he's a security expert, which I think goes to show how high you can aim here. And I guess that's my takeaway from all this. And this is my final comment: that the higher you aim, and the likelier it is that you'll be respected, and learn from these guys. And it should be not too difficult in this environment to become a very good, very helpful thought leader. Thanks.